Speaking of Alphabet, we're seeing shares of Alphabet, the parent company of Google, in focus today, higher after reporting their Q1 results. Here with the numbers is Yahoo Finance's Brad Smith.
Yeah, thanks so much. We're taking a look at shares higher by about 3.4% right now, and this was a beat on top and bottom lines against the consensus estimates from Bloomberg. And EPS adjusted, they came in at $1.17 versus the expectation, but $1.08 there. That's a beat. Also, check mark, yes, you got a beat on revenue. That came in at $69.7 billion. That's the overall revenue number, but here's what a lot of analysts focus in on, is that revenue number less TAC, traffic acquisition costs, and that came in by my back of the envelope calculations at $58 billion here. And so continuing to look through some of the numbers, important to note for some of the different lines of business within Alphabet. Of course, this the parent company of YouTube as well. YouTube ads in the quarter, that came in at about $6.69 billion. That was actually a decrease year over year compared to the first quarter of 2022. So keep that in focus. We'll see what more type of color we get on the earnings call about that. And of course, we'll be breaking that down after the call. But you were wondering what the company would say about artificial intelligence. It really only took them the second line in the first quote from Sundar Pichai, who is the CEO of Alphabet and Google, saying, "We're pleased with our business performance in the first quarter. Search performing well, momentum in cloud, introduced important product updates anchored in deep computer science and AI." Yes, artificial intelligence, not the great 76er Allen Iverson there. So ultimately, at the end of the day, we're going to hear more about that on the call. The CFO, Ruth Porat, also adding that resilience in search and momentum in cloud resulted in Q1 consolidated revenues of $69.8 billion. That was actually up 3% year over year. So those are some of the high-level takeaways here. Right. It's going to be important to see what they say on the call with regard to artificial intelligence,
in particular,
as we mentioned, cloud and that business, especially as there's more deal scrutiny in this environment among some of their portfolio clients.
Yeah, and you're right. And Pichai said in a recent interview, in a 60 Minutes interview, he said, quote, "Every product of our company will be impacted by AI, by the quick development of AI." And he said society needs to prepare for the advancement. So they've got to both catch up and stay ahead of the curve with regard to AI. So no surprise about their focus there. And it's interesting, the note that you mentioned about YouTube, because you recall that Susan Wojcicki stepped down from that. She'd been the leader of that unit for years. I mean, she was one of basically the OGs with the company. I mean, Google started in her basement. So it's interesting to see that there is a little bit of softness, though certainly some of that probably factoring in terms of the transition there with regard to YouTube. We'll definitely be looking out on that call for the impact with regard to AI and Bard. And of course, the job cuts that they mentioned. I mean, the first heavy job cuts.
Yeah, certainly that is going to be the focus. AI, I'm sure a number of analysts are going to be asking Sundar Pichai and the team questions about that, just in terms of their strategy, how they exactly plan to take on Microsoft, who widely is viewed as a leader in the space, at least for now, for their investment in OpenAI. When you take a look at some of these numbers here, though, it was pretty positive here for Google, given the fact that a lot of the focus was on the search business, because Alphabet and its dominance that the company has had in search, they have the most to lose with the fact that Microsoft has been gaining some traction over the last couple of months in regards to Bing and their how they have woven in AI into their Bing search. So something that certainly the street was bracing themselves for in this report. But search performing well, like they said in this release, and also momentum in cloud, enough to really move shares to the upside.
Yeah, just very briefly here, also want to mention the stock repurchases. It seems that the board of directors authorized a repurchasing of an additional $70 billion of Class A and Class C shares. And so that particularly what the stock could also be moving here, even though we did get the beat on top and bottom line, ultimately the stock typically would react higher on a repurchase announcement like this. That's just what you're seeing. Options AI was actually looking for a post-market or after-market move after the earnings dropped by about 4.7%. On the outset of the announcement, we got roughly that at about 4%. We'll continue to track to see where shares are moving. But you mentioned cloud a moment ago, too. Did want to come back to that because look at the growth year over year in that cloud division, coming in at what, $7.4 billion, $7.45 billion versus the $5.8 billion that they saw in the same quarter last year. You talk about the growth narratives that these companies are trying to retell to investors, to their customers. customers. And that is evidence when you see Google Cloud performing the way it did, even in an environment where some of these deals, as we were talking about, are being more scrutinized. Is
that right about expectations, that cloud growth? Percentage-wise, I think it was right along the lines of expectations.
Essentially.
I hate to jump back to it, but did we see the continued ad slowdown in this report? Because this would have been the second straight and third overall.
We did
not hear you reference it.
In terms of Google advertising overall, that came in at about $54.5 billion. That is a slowdown versus the same quarter last year.
Okay.
That came in at about 54.66.
Sorry, you did mention that. That's on me.
You know
Second
what? No, I
straight
mentioned the top
and
line.
two out of
actually.
three.
Yeah.
There's a lot of numbers flying around. Yeah. Keep track of everything.
Brad doesn't miss many, so I usually do.
All right, again, shares moving to the upside here in After Hours. Brad Smith, great stuff. Thanks so much.